I'll first start by introducing myself. My name is Jean Wells, and I'm the current president of Wisconsin Craft. I am a full-time potter in the Milwaukee area. And I am pinned right now along with our vice president, Kate Moratz. Hi. Kate is also a ceramic artist living in Marshfield, Wisconsin. And so the two of us will be moderating tonight's meeting. So let me introduce to you Annemarie Sawkins. Annemarie is a Milwaukee-based curator, an art historian, and the recent co-author of A Creative Place, A History of Wisconsin Art, which was just published last year. It is quite an extensive book. Here we go. It's huge, it's beautiful, and it's heavy. And when we were talking yesterday with Annemarie, she said there's a debate whether or not, I think it's what, 7.5 or 8 pounds? It is heavy. Annemarie has curated several exhibitions and has also traveled exhibitions to museums across the United States. From 1999 to 2012, she was a curator at the Haggerty Museum of Art at Marquette University in Milwaukee. Annemarie says that she is open to having questions during the presentation if you have any. So I think Kate and I will be monitoring the chat box. So if you want to type something in the chat, please do. Otherwise, we might pause here and there depending on how the presentation goes and see if anybody wants to ask a question in the middle. Or you can wait till the end, write your question down and ask it at the end when we open it up for questions too. So we'll just play it by ear.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be tonight's keynote speaker. I'm very excited and pleased to be with you tonight. I'd like to thank Jean Wells and Katie Moratz and also Kathy DeVries, who introduced the idea of having me speak to you today. So I am here for you. I'd like to answer any questions that you have. Would be impossible for me to tell you everything that I learned in the process of working on this book because there is so much, but there are points that I'd like to make along the way. So first and foremost, it was an enormous project. It was a huge opportunity. I heard about the book project from Gary Gressel, who many of you may know. Gary had been in conversation with Tom Lidke. Tom Lidke at the time had retired from the Museum of Wisconsin Art and was doing some work with the Cedarburg Art Museum. The Cedarburg Art Museum basically took on the project and he was looking for a co-author. So when I heard about the opportunity from Gary Gressel, I waited a few days and then I called Tom Lidke. Tom Lidke said, I was hoping you would call. So that was kind of a nice indication that we would make a good partnership. As you can see from the cover of the book here, it's authored Tom Lidke and Annemarie Sawkins. We also have another author named Ernie Beauchart, who wrote the first chapter on the Native American artists, which I'll show you in just a minute. So the book itself is produced by the Cedarburg Art Museum, a small museum, a museum that was probably dwarfed by the budget of the book project. It was originally envisioned as a 3-year project, but became a 4-year project after contracts were written after the first year. And then it took a little more time than that to actually wrap up all the research and to print the book itself. So a 5-year project for me. But I do want to just interject with the next image to say that the book was slated to be a 20-hour per week project, and so not necessarily a full-time job. It certainly became more than that. But in the meantime, I did have a wonderful opportunity to curate an exhibition called Art Japan 2021 to 1921. And this took place at the Warehouse. If you're not familiar with the Warehouse, it is a new museum in Milwaukee connected with Guardian Fine Art on St. Paul Avenue. And they showcase primarily the collection of Jan Sayre and John Shannon. It's a fantastic space, but they do have quite a considerable collection of Japanese art. And I just show you this because you are craft people and you can see the extent to which art and craft are immediately married in or with Japanese art. So also as a way of a little introduction to what I'm doing as a curator as well. And then to second that thought, I am in the midst of working on a project called In the Park with Olmsted, a historical, well, actually a vision for Milwaukee, but it is the historical look at Milwaukee's parks. And this is an exhibition that opens at the Villa Terrace on April 14th. And so I formally invite you all to attend the opening on April 14th. It will be a fantastic exhibition and part of the 200th year celebration of Olmsted's birth, which takes place April 24th, or sorry, April 26th. So anyway, a little bit more background. And now to the book. I'm starting with the table of contents, so you can just get a sense of the extent of the book. I intend to speak about the chapters that I was most intimately involved in, and those are chapters 5, 6, and 7. As I said earlier, the first chapter introduces the Native presence, the beginning of art in Wisconsin, and this was a major, like, absolute requirement for Tom Lidke and for others that we not neglect the Native Americans, that we really start with their contribution. For me, it was important not only that their contribution be part of the book, but their contribution be continuous throughout the book. And in the process of doing research on the book, I was reading the scholarship of Melanie Herzog, who became the editor of the book. And she actually has had experience with Native American art and exhibitions and scholarship. So she was working first and foremost with me, but then we paired her with Robert Beauchart, and she worked on the first chapter. And so it became sort of a co-authored chapter, if you will. But then she was also involved with making sure that the Native voice was not solely parked in one chapter, but that it continued throughout the entire book. So as you can see here, we've got the Native Americans and then the introduction of sort of Europeans with chapter 2 and chapter 3. And then it was largely the sort of European ideology and experience of the immigrant that had the greatest stamp on art in this area in its very early iterations. I worked on the probably more 1940 to the year 2000. We cut off the book at the year 2000 because it just seemed appropriate to do so, and so that we would not be mired in saying too much about art that was being produced at sort of more recently. So from the Native presence to the year 2000 was our mandate. It's difficult to, in some instances, to include or avoid sort of what some artists are doing. And for me in particular, knowing the trajectory of certain artists after the year 2000 made that dividing line a challenge at times. But I'll perhaps speak more of that as we go forward. All right, so moving quickly. When it came to suggesting a cover for the book, and this is some of the background that I'd like to share with you that you won't actually know reading the book directly, but I only made one proposal for the cover of the book, and that was this image. I felt very strongly that William Wiley's As Wisconsin States into the Future was perfect because it included I don't know, can you see my pointer or not? Yeah, no? So it included sort of these effigy mounds. It has our roll of cheese. It has the Wisconsin motto. It has the Badger coat of arms. It has the reference to the Wisconsin sesquicentennial, of which this was a print. And then all of this red area is really a reference to the granite or the earth of the stone of Wisconsin. So I felt there was just so much about Wisconsin here, and that it had a map of Wisconsin, that this made perfect sense as a fun title or a cover for the book. But that didn't come to pass. You win some battles and you lose others. So I just wanted to share that with you because you wouldn't know that looking at the book. But the image that we did choose actually is a painting from the Cedarburg Art Museum, and it's a detail because it's actually a very large horizontal painting, which was also restored or conserved or cleaned in advance of being photographed for the actual cover of the book. A small victory I had was getting Teresa Agnew's image. DOT straightens out the lines on the back of the book. So the back cover is the image on the right screen. And this is a piece that I actually saw in, I saw her work when I was at the Renwick in Washington, DC. This particular piece is actually part of the Milwaukee Art Museum collection. But I think it's wonderful because it's got the natural world and then it's got the built world. And so, I thought that was appropriate, starting with the Native Americans and going through the year 2000. But in any event, that's on the back. And Teresa Agnew was featured in the newspaper article that Jim Higgins just wrote about the book. There's a review in last Sunday's Journal Sentinel if you're interested in finding that. So, so that's the cover and the back. We've looked at the table of contents. Now I'd like to sort of jump into some of the artists and some of the questions that came up in the construction of the book as well. So perhaps many of you know Eugene von Brushenhein, a self-taught artist. He was only discovered after his death, and his primary sort of his most important years were 1954 to 1963. So if you think about it, and then he died in 83. So if you think about it, should he be discussed as part of the, post-war period during the 50s and 60s, or should he be discussed in the 80s after his work was actually discovered and he started to be quite a phenomena in the art world? So we decided to place him in the moment in which he created the artwork, but it was largely unknown until after his death. He was an extraordinary artist and an interesting person. His birthday coincided with Halley's Comet, and he was taught evolution and reincarnation by his parents, and so he had some sort of fantastic ideas about the apocalypse and created work really with a very minimal budget. I mean, he and his wife, Marie, who he photographed thousands of times or hundreds of times, were rather poor throughout their life, but he managed to make paintbrushes with locks of her hair. He used sort of paper bags and chicken wings and turkey bones and clay, which he harvested from the yard, and all sorts of manner of material to make what is really amounted to quite visionary works of art. And in the context of Wisconsin craft, I point out just the extreme creativity of being open to any material and then creating these wonderful chairs or little thrones. He also made crowns, which you'll see in this next image, all out of clay and out of bones, which he then painted. So he was extraordinarily creative with a variety of mediums. So that's an artist who's really quite well known across the country now for his work. So, and obviously native of Wisconsin. So then another issue that came up with the book had to do with newspaper articles, like how could we possibly include all of the articles that have been written about artists, because there just wouldn't be enough room within the book itself to include all of that bibliography. So at one point it was sort of decided that, well, we wouldn't include any of the major newspapers unless they were being quoted directly for the text, so footnoted in the text. But then that brought up an interesting reality, and that was that sometimes women artists are not getting the same coverage. They're not getting major publication opportunities the way male artists are. And so if you eliminate the newspaper references to a woman's art or to her artistic practice, then perhaps there's no bibliography. In the end, I created a very extensive monographic bibliography, alphabetical by artist names, where each artist received 3 to 5 entries about their work. And this is, I'm showing you an example of Ruth Ewart Newmeyer's work. And she was probably, like many contemporary artists, juggling a lot of roles. She was a mother, she was an artist, she was working, she was teaching. So really juggling quite a bit and producing art as well of what I think is a high quality. I mean, already in the late 40s, she's creating pieces like this, 2 Parakeets, which is quite abstract for the late 40s, a wonderful work that has geometric qualities, but color plain, and also some figurative elements in the form of the birds as well. So in the end, it was decided by the museum that the bibliography that was of each of the artists was that was not room for that. So it was actually cut, much to my sadness and chagrin. But in any event, that does exist and may be posted electronically. So something to think about, like the sources and the opportunities that artists have. Another artist who I'm sure many of you are quite familiar with is Harvey Littleton. He is known as the founder of the American Studio Glass movement. And he's responsible really for these quite avant-garde workshop classes that took place in Toledo, Ohio, on the grounds of the Toledo Art Museum, where he and some fellow glass artists and craftsmen and even people with expertise from the industry were working out the logistics for blowing glass outside of a major studio. Obviously, there's places like Tiffany's and Steuben's where glass was being created on a regular basis, but to give more ownership and possibility for the individual artist to be a manufacturer of artistic objects out of glass. And so he really started a major revolution while a professor at the University of Wisconsin. And his students went on to found glass programs in other universities, and then their students, so it really was like a brick falling in a pond and creating a ripple effect and a major new medium in art, or not a new medium, but a major sort of growth of a medium, a new artistic medium, which is still very important today. So, and his name will come up again in a little bit. So let's remember Littleton. And I show you in the middle of the slide, I show you he was a ceramic artist before he was working in glass. So we showed an example of his earlier ceramic work prior to his embracing glass full time. All right, and then one of his students is a woman named Audrey Handler, and she has the fame of being the living artist who's had a working glass studio the longest in the entire country. So that's pretty fantastic. But she was one of the early group of students that studied with Harvey Littleton. And she also had, she had a fellowship in London at the Royal Academy of Arts. And then she went on to teach at the Penland School. And I included this pronouncement that Marvin Lepofsky made when she was offered the opportunity to teach at Penfield, because I wanted to point out that one of the things that I learned in this great research project was that there really was quite a bit of bias against women. I mean, they're just plain and simple. The women artists were not given the same opportunities. They were not given the same respect or considered as seriously as male artists. So I would come across publications that, or exhibition catalogs that might say 3 master artists, and it would be Warrington Colescott, Arthur Thrall, Raymond Glockler, you know, you name it, but it would always be male artists. And so there really was a bias and there continues to be in the art world against women, or a sort of, they don't receive the same opportunities or have not been valued to the same extent. So Marvin Lepofsky says no men will take a class from a woman, but of course they did. And Audrey Handler has been making art out of glass for decades, and she, with this example called the wedding breakfast, is actually going beyond glass and really creating a multimedia piece, and so was moving glass in a different direction through this work. So hats off to Audrey, I say. She's a very wonderful woman too, out of Madison. So bibliography, research material, it's our thought that the book is, well, it's clearly a survey, and as a survey, it becomes a starting point for more research. And there is some fantastic research that has been done on Wisconsin artists, on women artists. Many of you probably know Linda Nocklin's seminal article, "Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists?" You know, it's complicated, it's very complicated. Women are doing very heady works of art, oftentimes I found, and receiving different opportunities, but that's changing. But there's also some women scholars, and I wanted to point those out. Jody Kloss was at the Chazen Museum, and now is at the Wisconsin, at the Innovation Center. And she's written about Fred Fenster and Eleanor Motti, two very important metalsmiths at UW. Martha Dexter Lynn wrote about American studio ceramics, and some of these references include Wisconsin artists as well. Joe Ortel is at Beloit College and wrote about Truman Lowe, who a Native American artist doing fantastic things with wood and feathers, and until his recent passing. And then another another book that I highly recommend is called Hidden Treasures: The Life and Art of Theodore Svoboda, who was another artist who was from Wisconsin, from Racine, but then made real headwaves in New York, you know, prior to the war, and then later in his life was painting in Washington State. So, but this is a fascinating book about his life and about his experiences in New York, and then his studio in the sort of Hudson Valley area. But something I highly recommend, and very well written by Patricia Hamilton, who is actually his niece, I believe. So I mentioned Fred Fenster. He was actually recruited to the University of Wisconsin by Harvey Littleton. And this brings up a really important point. A lot of the chapters that I worked on, I actually was tracing the UW system and the extent to which they were really looking for talented artists across the country to revitalize or rejuvenate various departments. And Fred Fenster was somebody who was recruited, by Harvey Littleton, and really was a phenomenal metalworker. He started primarily in pewter, and I show you an example of pewter on the left. And on the right is a more recent teapot, showing the sort of evolution of his design from more classic and influenced by European or Art Nouveau or even Scandinavian mid-century modern to a more streamlined aesthetic, if you will. So, but the point here I wanted to make again was that the university system really was very proactive in finding artists across the country. I'm thinking of John Balsley as well, who's been very creative and shifted his practice across mediums throughout his career as well. But that was a very important and characteristic of Wisconsin, and what grew the program and what made the universities strongholds of artistic teaching and education. So an artist who, and then when it comes to materials, it wasn't always about silver or gold or the sort of high value materials either. Fred Voll, who was part of the metalsmith program, very influential teacher in Wisconsin for a period, actually went to New York. And I love this quote. He was told by an art dealer, use gold or forget it. And that was the moment that Fred Voll said, I'm going to make jewelry from material of no value, and he actually went on to have enormous success in this because he was chartering a new direction. And I think that's something that all artists should think about. Like, how can I chart a new direction? How can I look at this problem from a different angle? How can I be different? How can I define myself? How can I really, add value, be creative in a new way in pursuing your practice. So I show you two examples, and clearly he's using odds and ends pieces, and then also being humorous by adding the superheroes, Superman and Dick Tracy, and the sort of cartoon characters in the piece on the left. And some of his work was quite political as well. So he was wonderful to learn about and worth noting, certainly. And then who could not love Mary Knoll? Mary Knoll, I think, is an artistic giant. She was schooled, she studied in Chicago at the School of the Art Institute, and she turned every surface of her house into a work of art or into something artistic or creative. This is a view of her beachfront property in Fox Point, which was threatened with neighborhood complaints of too many visitors, and was temporarily, the Kohler Foundation discussed the possibility of moving the house, which thankfully they prevailed, and now it's staying in its original site. But as you can see, she's filled her garden with sort of concrete and stone monoliths and different portraits of figures and faces and creatures. And then the whole outside of her house is also covered. Notice the space over the garage. She's given it a textural treatment with wood and paint. And then in the inside, she painted every surface. She hung paintings. She created glass sort of mosaic type pieces and decorations around the fireplace. She was also a jeweler, and she made some incredible jewelry with these various figures as well. And what I wrote at the bottom of the page here is a quote, not from Mary, it's not a quote, but it's something that an artist told me once. He said, to the question of like, why do you make art, or why are you an artist? And he said, I can't not make art. And I assume that's how many of you feel, that you just have to make art because that's in your blood or your DNA. So that's something I felt about a lot of the artists that are in the book, because they just had such a passion and such a desire to make art that they couldn't not make art. And so that's what they did. Some of these artists also had careers that were, decades long, sometimes 4 or 5 decades. If you think of Schomer Lickner or Ruth Grotenrath, I mean, they just had very long careers that spanned several chapters. They were involved in the WPA period, and then in a sort of modern post-war period as well, all the while being creative within the various contexts. So that became a challenge. And there are some artists then that are included in several chapters. Lucia Stern is one of them. Edward Steichen is another. Schomer Lickner, Ruth Grotenrath, they are covered in a couple of chapters. But when it came to the various artists, I was looking at what was their high point. What was the work of art that really was their most significant, or represented a major transition, or received a lot of recognition, or was controversial, or just, was lauded in the newspaper, or was sort of critical to their careers. So Lucia Stern, this is a Journal Sentinel photograph of the artist. She was well-heeled, well-educated, very creative, and then again, working in a variety of mediums. Many of you may know her layered pieces, which have sort of net or stitchery over abstracted images. I'm going to show you a couple images. So this is perhaps classic or most familiar Lucia Stern. She learned from her mother, who was a lace maker, how to sew and embroider, which was more often the case in that era. And then she just simply layered shapes and this netting fabric, creating abstract pieces that have a real sense of depth. But she was a colorist, as well as someone who understood form and abstraction at a moment when that was really new and revolutionary. So she was sort of discovered, she traveled extensively, as I said, and she was discovered by the director of the Museum of Non-Objective Painting, which was, she was a woman named Hilla Rebay, and she was basically the curator of the collection that became the Guggenheim. So it was called the Museum of Non-Objective Painting, and Hilla Rebay picked up Lucia Stern as an artist, along with several other well-known European artists. And she admired Lucia Stern's work because of its expressiveness, because of its clear abstraction, because it was non-objective, because it was often serial. So there was a lot to admire in her work. And I think Lucia Stern is an artist who could certainly be the subject of a major publication or a major study. So while I tried to go in depth with her work, there's more to be said, and she could be the focus of a book or a monograph. So, and if you don't know already, she's known for signing her work with the stitchery Lucia. So that's what you see in the lower left-hand corner of this image. She oftentimes did not date her work, which makes it sometimes challenging. But I just want to show you two more images. On the left in particular, I'm showing you the fact that she's working three-dimensionally. So she created these hanging pieces, these pendants that she envisioned being outside of buildings and in parades. And she also created totems, not unlike the idea of Louise Bourgeois and her very early totems, if you know that work at all. But really working in abstraction and working in multi-mediums and envisioning art as decorative and part of ceremonies and parades and building decorations, and kind of on a much broader and more fanciful fields. So a great artist who, as I say, deserves more research. And then another wonderful discovery, and this goes to the point that there's some incredibly hardworking female artists who didn't always get the attention that they deserve. This is Marjorie Cralick. She created a suite of mosaics that are in the Wisconsin State Office Building, which earlier, some years ago, housed the DMV. Now the DMV is no longer there, but you might know the building from that. It's also very close to the Milwaukee Public Museum, the State Office Building. But Marjorie Cralick really understood mosaics, not simply mosaics as a flat medium or sculptural sort of puzzle piece. If you look on the image on the left, you can see to the extent to which she's using not just mosaics of different sizes, but rocks and different cut forms to really create a very three-dimensional sculptural work. She was a tireless worker and studied in Italy for a number of years, apprenticing with a major mosaic firms, and then really getting these major commissions. And the interesting story behind the particular commission for the Wisconsin State Office Building was that she was offered the opportunity to speak to the committee, and they had proposed these images of industry, so farming and I don't know, major industries. And she said, well, no, I want to do something native. I want to do something that relates to the state. And so she was more interested in the nature. And so she created works like the one you see on the right, which is, say, a more representative of Wisconsin in winter, let's say. And she wanted to go back to nature as a source of inspiration rather than industry. So the contribution of a woman might be that direction rather than just creating or representing what is manufactured, let's say. So she was a great discovery and a wonderful artist. And she's advancing a sort of a traditional medium in many ways, one that can't have been easy to manufacture either. So, and so in the book, and this is interesting, for me, there were two major themes that particularly interested me. One is certainly women artists, but then the other was the marriage of art and craft, or the confluence of art and craft, or the extent to which artists would draw from traditional craft processes and introduce that into their own work and create sort of new. I mean, historically there's been a division between craft and art, but I think after the war, everything opened up and artists could draw from craft, and craft artists could be more monumental and create pieces that would fit in a museum. And so there was quite a bit of conversation between art and craft. And the other element of that is that some artists were working with fibers or working with thread or stitchery or knitting or crocheting. And, this was all part of the domain of what was considered women's work, right? And so, and it's not just as I will show you, not just a male-female divide, certainly, but rather more about the type of the work. And there's just some very industrious people in Wisconsin, including Mary Barrow, who I show here, who worked not only in thread and and stitchery, but also in paint and in sometimes in prints and painting and other elements, collage elements, let's say, who really are changing the field and making what had been dismissed as women's work more front and center in the art world. A characteristic of much of this work, and I'll show it in the work of Anne Kingsbury, is that it's labor intensive. I mean, and for example, not to be too broad, and sometimes the men were making large sculptural metal pieces, whereas Linda Montano, for example, for her senior project at UW, did something with chickens and chicken houses at the top of the arts building, and every night she would change the position of the chickens, and it was a very conceptual piece, and for her it was designed very intentionally to be anathema or contrary to what the more macho brawny guys were doing in class. So, you know, that stuff was interesting to me because of the different direction and the creativity behind it. I loved what Mary said too. Oops, let me go back for just a quick second. My intention is to shatter perceptions by making the best art possible using whatever medium is suggested by the idea. I love that because the idea is front and foremost in her mind when she's deciding what to do or how to do it or what material to use. And I'm sure many of you are thinking the same in your own practices. All right, so this is just two examples of her work. I love the one on the right. It's actually in the book. It belongs to a lovely collector named Mary Chemnitz. And I particularly picked this work of art, the one on the right, because Mary Barrow had said to Mary Chemnitz that if she could buy it back, she would. So this, in my mind, means that it's really a special work of art to the artist, right? And so that's why it was relevant. And it's a bit of a self-portrait as well. So moving on, I think we're running out of a little time, but and then in thinking about craft too, there's artists like Adolf Rosenblatt, who actually started working as a metal artist, so bronze casting and this and that. And then thanks to his children who were working in Play-Doh or something, you know, he turned to wax and then to clay as a medium which was easier to manage and not as expensive, and so he could make more monumental works of art. And so he's working in clay. He's creating works that reflect the community, because this is the balcony of, you know, the Oriental theater, so he can represent specific people and sort of the idea of humanity, the couple, the single people, the older people, the younger people, the families, etc., in a very humanistic approach to art. And he also created pieces that reflect headlines from the New York Times, and just is famous also for the Oriental, sort of the Oriental pharmacy, which was where a lot of artists gathered, and they had riveting conversations about art. So, you know, possibilities in clay, and this is a very, very large work. So that's interesting. And of course, the evolution makes sense from, say, bronze to clay in his case. Other people working in metals in creative ways include Mary Tingle, whose work is on the left, and then Richard Lippold. This bird of paradise is a very small piece. It's only about this big, but it hangs from a thread or fish line, and then becomes three-dimensional, and it's just moves ever so slightly with the slightest breeze, and kind of becomes very ethereal and sort of lightweight, and it's about the dematerialization of space. And both artists, I'd say in this case, are really thinking not only about the form, the necklace or the wire, but also the way that the wire or the metal activates the negative space, right? With the opening that Mary gives us in her necklace, it becomes like a window, right? And so there is a moment in the post-war period where you find this amazing dematerialization of an activation of space, which Wisconsin artists were at the forefront. Richard Lippold goes on to do some huge and enormous and fantastic works of art that are in lobbies of buildings and hotels. So major, large scale works that again are of thin wire and dematerialized space. Part of the challenge of the book was trying to include artists from all across the state, which, we could have spent another 5-10 years trying to make sure that we were able to do this. In some cases, I think we were successful. In other cases, I'm sure there was artists that we should have included. But the nature of a survey is that it's a survey, and the works be emblematic of the success that the creativity that's being manifest in the state. So, but a wonderful couple, and there's a couple of couples, artistic couples, but Palmyra-based artist Tom Rush and Karen Wicken. He is the woodworker in this team, and she makes this smaller flourishes. On the right-hand side, you can see the small nest that actually has a lid and includes an embroidered piece that she manufactured or created, which in some cases can be worn as pins. So they have sort of multiple functions and uses. But you can see on the left that this piece is carved from a trunk of tree. So a really exciting dynamic piece. And they're just doing fantastic work, which has a lot of sort of private view holes and sort of little surprises throughout. And they go by the name Eccentric. So Eccentric, which is quite creative in and of itself. And then another artist that I adore is a woman named Sandy Byers. I'm sure some of you may know Sandy Byers' work. These are quite small. I wouldn't say they're more than 3.5 inches, less than 4 inches typically. And I love how sort of referential and non-referential they are. I mean, they're petite vases. They're like bulbs, like tulip bulbs or daffodil bulbs. They're also like flower buds, and or like rocks, they're just, and they fit in your hand perfectly, and they're made from porcelain. She has been very creative with all of her glazes and to reach that sort of modeled look. And she's very finicky with the forms and the glazing, and it has to be just right or she'll start over again. But she's working out of Rock Springs, Wisconsin, and just doing some incredibly creative things. She and her husband actually purchased a old 4-room schoolhouse, which doesn't sound that large, but it's an enormous, it's a large building. And they made ceramic studios out of one half and then a living space out of the other half. So this is the sort of stuff that's being created in Wisconsin as well and featured in the book. Eleanor Motti was hired by Fred Fenster, or joined Fred Fenster in the metals department at UW in Madison. And Eleanor was precocious in the sense that she mastered and embraced these electro sort of printing techniques on metal that you can see on the left-hand side in her sort of self-portrait mirror, if you will. And then of course the whole idea of the mirror being your reflected image, and then that being represented in the electronic form as well, was her early career as a metalsmith. And then she went on to make this just gorgeous jewelry an example of which is on the right as well. So an artist with a very long career. She joined the metals department at UW-Madison at a young age. I believe she may have been in her 30s when she became professor. So, but really those two professors really enlivened the department and impacted a whole generation of metalsmith artists. And in fact, sometimes metalworking was the foundation for a lot of Wisconsin artists. And I'm thinking specifically of Martha Glowacki, and I don't have her work featured in this talk, but she went on to make some incredible installation works, but her educational background is in metalsmithing and metalwork. So another metalsmith artist who is now based in California, but was a student at UW-Whitewater, is a man named David Frieda. And he went from making these abstracted pieces that you see on the left to eventually moving into very, very high-end jewelry, unique pieces made of enamel and based on naturalistic forms, orchids with diamonds, as I said. But he was a very, as a child, was a naturalist, catching butterflies and drawing incredibly accurate depictions of nature, and then incorporating that into his later jewelry work. But a very exciting artist who I hope to actually curate an exhibition of his work for Wisconsin, because he's a Wisconsin native. And then, yeah, I'll move a little quicker. Donna Look and Ken Loeber are, again, a sort of artistic couple. She works in birch bark and makes these incredible vessel forms. I wouldn't necessarily call them baskets per se, but she's very detail oriented. And then just being incredibly detailed or incredibly formal in her methodology, and hence the structure of her pieces. Her husband has been a jeweler, and he's, again, also inspired from nature, but then just being simple and straightforward in his form. So a single pearl, a crunched gold piece, pin, very elegant forms, drawing from nature. They work together in Door County. I think I'm getting over time, but I just want to talk a bit about fibers some more, because I'm sure some of you are working in fibers. I already said which image and why. A very important exhibition was Objects USA from 1968. There was quite a lot of Wisconsin artists represented in that exhibition. The Racine Art Museum did a redux of that exhibition and included a number of pieces, which included the one on the right, which is not in the book, but Gene Stamsta, who did the work on the right, and then Walter Nottingham, who did the work on the left, were two major Wisconsin artists that really helped to redefine fiber and what was possible with weaved work, with knitted work, with crocheted work, with any sorts of sort of manipulation of fibers. Why was the work on the left chosen? It was his magnum opus called Celibacy, and it hung at the Museum of Modern Art, so it was natural to include that in the book as the work of art that the Wisconsin artists had made that received traction in New York. So, you know, that's a great credit to the state, certainly. This is Gene Stamsta's work. This is in the exhibition at Cedarburg Art Museum and also in the book, but just a really fun, creative piece. She's taking weaving completely off the wall, making it sculptural, adding color and drama, and then the wonderful signature on the leg of the piece too. So just a great artist who also deserves probably her own major publication. Joanna Pullman, hilarious woman printmaker, loves process, works in printmaking, embossing, Xeroxing, photocopying, whatnot, but loves to do funny things, right? So this is a piece that's at the University of Wisconsin in the Special Collections and Archives. It's called Table of Contents with Appendix, and it's literally a table with contents, right, written all over it. And then the appendix is actually the appendix of a fold out. So she's being really creative with her vocabulary, with her ideas, and fun too, you know, being referential, handmade. She makes everything handmade, little suitcases and sometimes books that are contained in walnuts. And I mean, just fantastic work. Yeah. And then when it comes to, again, the topic of women, I found that some women were just making very intense, labor-intensive works. And Anne Kingsbury is the prime example of that. She's been beating this deer hide for decades. And then interestingly, including how much time things take in a even broader discussion of labor and women's work, like washing the dishes or doing the laundry, or, you know, and some of this comes out of a long series of journals that she's been doing, recording her time. And then in addition to being an artist, she has been an arts administrator, a co-founder of Woodland Patterns, which was a major, which continues to be a major small scale bookshop, art studio gallery place in Wisconsin, which has been very instrumental, I think, in sort of supporting the artists who make handmade books as well. Yes. And then of course here's a detail of Anne Kingsbury's work. Tiny little country slice of apple or something. 10 minutes for dressing, 10 minutes for hanging up, 10 minutes for folding, 10 minutes for the various tasks. She's a wonderful artist. And then there are artists like Elizabeth Tuttle, who I didn't learn about, honestly, until after the book was created. But she's an artist who crochets, because that's the technique that she prefers most. She was born in Minneapolis, but has since working in Wisconsin, and just is an example of an artist thinking about shadows and this and that, but an artist that I didn't know about and so isn't in the book, but could have been in the book. I could just leave it at that. And there are others for sure. And people were cut at the last part because the museum was told that the book shouldn't be longer than 400 pages. It's actually 464 pages. So, you know, but there are budget and time restraints and everything. I'm gonna just finish with two more thoughts. So Pauline Parker is an artist who I learned about because there was an exhibition at the Milwaukee Art Museum, and I thought, oh, well, her work fits perfectly into this whole chapter, or this whole section about men and women working in textiles and weaving and creating really more modern approaches to weaving. And then on the left, you'll see her piece called Anita Hill. So at the top are the male court that was judging her, and on the right and left are the various iterations of female sort of different women from around the world, and then shoes as an example of the multifacets that we represent. You know, each of us is multifaceted, and yet she wasn't given voice or considered. So a very political piece, obviously, but an interesting artist who I thought surely deserved to be in the book because of her creativity and her approach to quilting. And then, so what what suggestions do I have to artists? I know we're looking forward to questions, but I just wanted to say that what was helpful to me as a researcher and as a writer working on this grand survey was to find that artists had done a good job of putting their work out there or putting themselves out there. So I give Jan Sayre as an example, who has done an excellent job of having a Wikipedia page, updating the Wikipedia page, including publications. I was looking all over the place for material and sometimes even borrowing archives from artists like Barbara Manger, who just gave me a box of all the things that related to her career. These are the sort of source materials that I had. I received newspapers. I received copies of the Milwaukee Journal and the Journal Sentinel newspapers from the 80s and 90s. And I read through like 30 boxes of newspapers, reading all of the art sections. So, looking for quotes, artists that can quickly provide high resolution images, artists whose information is accessible either directly or through someone else who knows them, artists who have a plan for their work. That makes it easier for a curator who may be looking for examples of your work or want to know more of your work or evaluate your work or promote your work. So, and then back to the book. I don't know why I included that again. And I just want to say thank you. If anybody wants to reach out to me, this is their opportunity to take my information.
Great, thank you so much, Annemarie. We do have a couple of questions that were put in the chat. That was fascinating, by the way. And we know it's only just a tiny little blink of what is in the book. It was really interesting to see your thoughts and your processes on deciding. I'm sure it was very challenging. So one person did ask, in your research, did you find that artists, most of them were able to make a living being exclusively working artists? Were these artists that you featured pretty much full-time artists in the book, or do you have anything to say about that?
That's a fantastic question. I wasn't thinking about the economics of the individual artists, if that makes sense. I was thinking more about the work that they were creating. So certainly because of the UW system and other colleges and universities and art schools and colonies in Door County, for example, I was thinking about what they were creating, but the reality is that a lot of the artists in the book are really a product of the university system. So they're supported by that. And so they were artists / professors, art professors. And there was a shift actually that took place before and after World War II, where, and this impacted women as well, because originally the professors of art were sort of art teachers and not artists, if you will, or not practicing artists. And women were typically sort of pushed more towards degrees in art education, with the idea that they would be teachers of, say, of elementary school or high school art teachers, not so much career professors, art professors, or career artists, if you will. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there are some people, thankfully, that are making a living solely as artists, but I wouldn't say that was my criterion, if that answers your question.
Okay, well,
it gets complicated.
Yeah, I bet. And then I was just curious too, because you mentioned what a role the UW system, played in the book, artist features, and then just sustaining the art and crafts fields in Wisconsin. Did you have anything to say about what the role the WPA or the Milwaukee Handicraft Project had in this situation as well, in sort of like stabilizing or bringing forth the art and craft fields in the state?
So I didn't actually write chapter 4, but I can say that that Wisconsin was very successful when it came to the WPA, and there were other programs too along the lines of the WPA that were federally funded programs that allowed for the construction of, say, rustic bridges or camps or, and I think that the reason that Wisconsin, or I know that the reason that Wisconsin was so successful was because Wisconsin had essentially a lot of shovel-ready, what they called shovel-ready projects. So there was good administration that allowed Wisconsin to just throw these projects forward and then get federal money. Mm-hmm. So like the painting of the post office murals and things like that. And, there's murals in high schools and things like that. So I think just Wisconsin was very ready for that. And that's why it was successful. I know that there was it's in the book as well, but there was a major initiative around sort of women artists and creating dolls as part of the WPA, creating stencils and print fabrics and things like that. And those projects had dynamic leadership, and then they were very open to women, white and Black, and there was quite a lot of mixing of ethnicities and peoples within those projects. So yeah, cool. Wisconsin did well because of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then real quick here, did you find that many artists gain more traction in museums and galleries if they were multimedia versus only using one material or one medium?
Did they gain more traction? I mean, one recommendation that I make to artists usually is to work in at least two different directions or strains. So if you're a printmaker or a painter and you're working two-dimensionally, then I might say, well, pick up some clay and make something out of the clay, because some of the issues and problems that you have, say, in your painting can get resolved working three-dimensionally without you even realizing it. Did they get more traction? No, I'm not going to say necessarily that they got more traction. I think that the trend in art production is towards a more multifaceted multimedia. Installation is one major new direction in art that takes place after World War II. Again, 100 years prior, there was drawing and there was painting and there was ceramics, but there wasn't the kind of interdisciplinary practices that became more. I mean, for example, after World War II, acrylic paint was invented, and then that made a world of difference in terms of approaches, and there was new plastics and things like that. So I think it was just the art world and the art scene becoming more complex, and newer challenges and newer mediums and newer opportunities. Yeah. Okay. Great. And then one last important question that someone has is are there artists of color depicted in the book? Yes, there are. Yes, there are. So in chapter 6, now, not all the artists can receive all of the attention because of their long careers, right? And so it's in chapter 6. I spent quite a bit of time doing research on the African-American artists, largely in Milwaukee, because those are the ones that I discovered, but I met with them. I went through their archives. I discussed or learned about their experience in the art scene and how different it is, and how basically they created their own scene, sometimes exhibiting first and foremost at Milwaukee public libraries, and then creating art fairs outside of those libraries, sort of in the parking lot on the summer weekends and this and that. And there's a tendency among them to certainly feel like they were excluded from the white art world. So yes, I did give them time and space in the book for sure. And not just in chapter 6, also in chapter 7 as well.
Yeah, and you also mentioned that I noticed too myself in the exhibition that there's definitely a native artist theme throughout the book as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in this day and age, I mean, we are multicultural, we're more multi-ethnic, we're, multi-gender, we're,
Right. Well, thank you so much. This was really fabulous. I really loved how you tied craft into it too as well for our organization, and just really appreciate all the time you just gave us. And
yeah, if anybody has a follow-up question, if they think of the perfect question tomorrow, they can certainly call me or email me or text or something. I'm happy to sort of be a resource to all of you from now on out.
Annemarie, there's one great question too. Where can we find the book to purchase?
So it's available at the Cedarburg Art Museum. I do have a few copies, so if you're in Milwaukee and you want to swing by, I can sell you a copy. But otherwise, the Cedarburg Art Museum has them, and they will be getting into libraries as well. So that would be a way to get it if you wish not to buy it.
Yeah, and I do want to give a shout out to the Cedarburg Art Museum and encourage you to go to the exhibition. They have it separated like chapters in different rooms. So you can kind of walk around on both floors to kind of get a general sense of the book, which is really nice way to introduce yourself to the book if you have time. So do you know how long the exhibition is up there? Is it through May? I think I saw.
It's through May, yeah. I think it's, I believe it's May 6th.
Okay.
So through May. And actually there will be presentations. I am giving a presentation in early May, but every Wednesday in April, I believe there's a presentation on each of the chapters. So Ernie will speak the first Wednesday in April, and then Tom will speak, and then Rick Hartman is speaking, and then I'm speaking in early May. So
okay, great. Wow.
So you can look on the Cedarburg Art Museum website for more information on those talks.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Annemarie. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, and all best to you and your creative practices and your lives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, wow, that was pretty amazing. So we're gonna probably rush through the rest of our meeting and maybe just do one breakout session unless people want to stay and chat a little bit more. But that was a wealth of information, and I've had a chance to look at the book, and it's just packed with stuff. So some lucky winner will win it tonight. Okay, so number one, we want to say thank you for voting. We had 46 people vote in our current board of directors. That's a little over 20% of our membership, which is around 220 right now. So this is our current board. I'm just gonna say thank you to then our secretary, Ann Cook, Sherry Sipple, our treasurer, Andrew Linderman, who is leading up the education and program committee, along with Madai Delgado, and then Kathy DeVries, who's our development chair, and right now subbing as a marketing chair. So we're still in search of a marketing chairperson. So thank you to the board. All right, so one of the main things about why we are passionate about this organization and we're trying to recreate it is because we want to connect. We want to connect with one another and make connections with others. Threefold, right? Connecting to craft, connecting to each other, our colleagues and our supporters and patrons, people who love the fields. And then finally connecting to our communities in educational ways, in small ways and large ways. So it looks like our group is back. Oh yeah, good. So if you guys want to put yours You can put your view in gallery view. We're going to skip the second breakout because of the time, but I think we'll have Kate just share the rest of our presentation, because we have I know a lot of people expressed we all want to get together in person, so we have a really exciting thing to share with you that's coming up this summer. And here it is. We are happy to say we are offering our first one-day retreat. And I'm gonna, let's see, Madai, are you on? Are you here?
I am.
And unmuted. So I'm gonna have Madai talk a little bit about this upcoming event we're so excited for this summer. Go ahead.
I don't know. Can you see my face? Here we go.
Yeah.
A little bit.
No, we can't.
Can you see it? Okay. I just had to move the camera. So I am a multidisciplinary art teacher living in Wisconsin, specifically in Baraboo, where Devil's Lake, as is known to me, it is. So we are going to be hosting, my family and I are going to be hosting a weaving workshop. I am going to have a collaborative weaving project so that all the members can join in, or they can make their own individual project. We are providing a vegetarian lunch as well as meat for those that love to eat meat. And just trying to have just a wonderful time, enjoying ourselves, getting to know each other, making those connections, hopefully networking and learning more about each other. I am a woman of color. In a world where we're trying to bring more diversity and more awareness about how different and how alike we are, and embracing all those differences, hopefully we get to know each other and you guys enjoy this wonderful shelter that I have donated as part of this event. It's right next to the water, right next to the trails. I hope you guys can make it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Madai. So registration is now open on our website for this event. So you have to go in and look on events and then click, you'll see it and you can register. It's $45 for the day. You will need to get a park pass as well to enter into the park, Devil's Lake State Park, AKA Spirit Lake. So wonderful. Thank you, Madai.
Question, is there a deadline or a maximum number of persons for that event?
Good questions.
Knowing what I know about attendance, everyone is welcome and I will make the space. I'm Cuban, we always find a way.
Everybody in, huh?
They, in terms of getting the food, especially the non-meat, the vegetarian options, we would like to know at least a week ahead.
Oh, sure. Something reasonable.
Yep. Well, okay. I think there might be a date. I think it might be set in the registration as a week before, but we'll remind people obviously and ask them once we have that final date that Madai gives us in the next few months. But
thank you.
Spread the word and reserve your spot in the
even
area.
If you're not an artist, even if you don't consider yourself to be an artist, which in my mind everyone can create something. Mm-hmm. We are going to be working with natural things, so everyone is welcome to come.
No experience necessary.
Yes, that's right.
Great. Thank you. All right, so we're going to move on. We just have a few more events coming up. Of course, I think most of you know we have the Morning Glory Art Fair coming up in August. The jurying just took place on March 12th, so I believe artists were notified. And I hear there's an extensive waiting list. So if you were waitlisted, you still might have a chance to get in. Shows are really interesting, how they're changing a little bit that way. And applications just opened for the Milwaukee Fine Crafts Studio Tour. If you have a studio in Milwaukee County that you want to open to the public and be a host artist, that would be great. You can apply as a host artist on the tour. If you live outside Milwaukee County or even in Milwaukee County, and you don't want to open up your studio, but you want to be a part of the tour, you can apply as a guest artist. So we like to be inclusive as possible. It all depends on how many artists we can fit, depending on how many host artists there are each year. So this is our 4th year of having that event. Great. I'm going to pass the torch to Kate, and she'll take us through the rest.
All right. So again, I'm Kate, and I am the vice president. I'm also new to the organization. I'll admit I joined last year, but I'm really excited to be part of it and to be working on the committee, the exhibition committee. So we have been discussing this event. It's planned for 2023. The plan is for the exhibition to be up from March 24th through May 27th. We decided to call the exhibition Regeneration, and it's going to be in Wausau, Wisconsin. So central Wisconsin, really close to where I'm at. So about 45 minutes from where I live. So I'm going to be working with the gallery on making sure that this event has a lot of opportunities for our members. We're working on setting up like demos and artist talks during that time. So we will keep everybody posted on what those additional opportunities look like. And we haven't yet set up the call for entries for participants. We want everyone to apply that's interested. We hope that Regeneration feels like an appropriate title to everyone's work and how they can kind of fit into that. So please apply, please watch for emails regarding that. And we hope that we can see everybody there when it's open.
Yes, so we're, part of the goal of the new organization was to move our biennial around the state. And so we're happy to have it in Wausau. We hope to have some plans in place where there can be collaborative getting artwork to these farther distances for people. So once we see who's all participating, we can maybe work on either renting a van, if we can get some grants, or working together to get artwork there as a plan. So that's the plan. And we also hope to have our next year's annual membership meeting in person up in Wausau, hopefully during before the opening of the event or somewhere tied into the opening. So if artists are planning to coming to the opening event, that we can have our membership meeting in person that day would kind of be the goal right now. So we still have to decide that.
Yep, and if you haven't been to the CVA, it's on the what they call the 400 block in Wausau, which is a really beautiful downtown area with a lot of really great restaurants and the Grand Theater right next to it. So it's a really beautiful part of central Wisconsin, and it really has a really nice downtown. So hopefully we'd all be able to get together somewhere there and discuss the show.
Awesome.
All right, so this next slide just shows the different committees that we have in our organization and who is participating where. The big thing is that we want as many people participating as possible. The more voices that are in these different committees, the better. We want everybody's input to meet as many needs and kind of interests within our organization as possible. So if you are interested in participating more, on our next slide here, this shows which chair positions are currently available. So exhibitions chair, marketing chair, membership chair, and then we have a ton of different committees here that we're looking for more people to participate in. And then additionally, we may have interest in people completing these additional skills. So if you are interested, like it says on this slide, you can complete the survey that's located here on our website, and we can find a place for you to share your opinions and help strengthen our organization. All right, so I think we're on our last slide here, and the book winner, I did a random number generator to select our winner here. So Becca Nichols is the book winner.
Congratulations. I don't have to mail this then. That's good.
That makes it easy, right?
Congratulations.
Yeah, and if you know, and if you, those of you that are still here, know more artists throughout the state, you know, please encourage them to join and to, you know, join committees or fill chair positions. We really want to make something awesome happen in Wisconsin here. And the more people we can get involved, the better. I know that a lot of you are located in Milwaukee, and I'm here in central Wisconsin. So it'd be really great for us to, you know, continue to expand our organization more.
Yeah, exactly. We're on a roll and our organization is growing. One thing I was really happy to see, I want to just say real quick about when I went to the exhibition and I started looking at this book, and what some of the artists listed and mentioned in the book were members or leaders in our organization, right? So they mentioned, you know, the Wisconsin Society of Applied Arts, which was the beginnings of our organization, you know, in the early 20th century, and the roles that those artists played in the history of Wisconsin art. So it's kind of cool to me, it just reaffirmed what we're doing here in Wisconsin as a group of artists and supporters to really kind of elevate and, you know, keep our crafts and medium strong and noticeable. And I just want to say, I really like the advice that I hadn't even thought about it, that Annemarie Sawkins mentioned at the end to artists about making information about yourself as a working artist available, right? I mean, what good tips? Start a Wikipedia page about yourself, right? Make sure you have press information on your website about, you know, any articles, links to articles and things like that, and photos of high quality photos available, headshots, photos of your work. That was all really great advice I think she gave us today as well. So if anybody wants to stick around, Kate and I are going to hang out for a little bit. If you want to talk, if you want to chat about Anne-Marie's conversation, Anne-Marie's presentation.
Questions.
Questions about the
questions about committees or chair positions, anything like that. You know, we'd love to fill you in on it.
Yeah.